Chair recognizes the senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, I rise today to oppose Russell Vought's nomination to be the Director of the Office of Management and Budget. As the ranking member of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, I have worked hard and across the aisle to strengthen our federal government's effectiveness in providing services that Americans rely on every day, to improve transparency in the way that government operates, and to make sure that taxpayer dollars are always used efficiently. These are some of the most fundamental roles the federal government plays in the daily lives of Americans, and we are duty-bound to ensure that they continue. But if Russell Vought is confirmed to lead the Office of Management and Budget, I am concerned that he will throw these principles out the window and wreak havoc on the services that Americans count on from the federal government every day. Although it may not be the most well-known agency, the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, is a critical office in the Executive Office of the President, with significant responsibilities ranging from developing and executing the budget approved by Congress to improving agency performance and reviewing regulations. The actions carried out at OMB affect the daily lives of millions of Americans. And this little-known agency controls nearly every action that other federal agencies take, directing agency policies as well as controlling their budgets. OMB is charged with allocating federal resources that Congress appropriates to agencies that protect our national security, help communities recover from natural disasters, and provide vital services like Social Security, Medicare, and Veterans Services. This funding helps hire police officers and firefighters. It helps provide families with heating assistance in the cold winter months, and it helps towns and cities upgrade their roads and bridges. OMB's work matters to every American, and we cannot confirm someone to lead this office who will not act in the best interest of every American. As the great American poet, Dr. Maya Angelou, once said, quote, "When people show you who they are, you should believe them the first time." Russell Vought has repeatedly shown us and told us who he is. And he is someone who has and will continue to willfully break the laws passed by Congress at the direction of the President, to fundamentally alter how the federal government works for the American people. Vought's abject disregard for the Constitution and the rule of law, and his willingness to pick which Americans are winners and losers under the Trump administration completely disqualifies him from serving in this important role. I want to start by revisiting the illegal and dangerous actions that Russ Vought took when he served as OMB director during the first Trump administration. During his previous tenure leading the Office of Management and Budget, Vought brazenly and willfully flouted the laws passed by Congress that direct how federal resources should be spent. On multiple occasions, Vought refused to disperse funds that Congress passed on a bipartisan basis to address serious national security concerns and to protect the safety of our country. For example, Vought directed the OMB to withhold vital security assistance to Ukraine, assistance that Congress directed to be spent with bipartisan backing. This action put our country's security at risk by extorting Ukraine, a very valuable ally, fighting to stop Putin's illegal actions. This extortion wasn't to help advance some official U.S. foreign policy or perhaps support our nation's standing and security around the world. No, It was an action intended to help President Trump politically as he tried to discredit Joe Biden during the 2020 presidential election. And you don't have to take my word for it. The Government Accountability Office investigated and confirmed that this was a violation of the law. On top of that, Vogt willfully delayed sending vital disaster relief to Puerto Rico as communities were struggling to recover from the devastations of Hurricanes Maria and Irma. And again, Congress passed a law to provide this funding that was desperately needed to help recover from these destructive hurricanes. And then again, Congress passed a law specifically requiring the funds to be dispersed on time to people in desperate need. Mr. Vogt delayed those funds. He broke the law and he prolonged the suffering and the recovery of communities who needed immediate help. In 2021, the Inspector General for the Department of Housing and Urban Development confirmed that Vogt's refusal to send hurricane relief assistance was an inappropriate action and that it caused real harms for the people of Puerto Rico. The Inspector General report stated, and I quote, Brian Montgomery, the former Deputy Secretary and Acting Secretary of HUD, recalled telling former OMB Director Vogt that OMB's actions were tantamount to holding disaster relief funds hostage. When asked what he meant by the hostage statement, Montgomery told the OIG these demands slowed down the fund of aid that was desperately needed by people in a very desperate situation. The report also concluded that this violation of the law caused serious delays in getting assistance to victims. In addition to this devastating delay, the Office of Inspector General also detailed how Vogt and OMB, under his leadership, stonewalled and failed to cooperate with their independent oversight investigation. Again and again, Russell Vogt ran OMB. He ignored laws passed by Congress that directed how taxpayer money should be spent and failed to cooperate with independent oversight investigation of his illegal actions. A 2020 investigation by the Government Accountability Office found that under Mr. Vogt's leadership, OMB broke the law 8 more times by directing certain federal agencies to continue to operate during the 2018 shutdown. 8 more times breaking the law. Mr. Vogt, it's on a record here. And when I pressed him about these actions during the confirmation hearing, Vogt said, and I quote, we had a different view of the law. In the shutdown, there were a lot of precedent. We found that they aren't legal decisions. Every time you have a different play call, GAO will look at them. There'll be different views between the executive branch and the executive branch. A different view of the law? Well, Mr. Vogt cast this as just a difference of opinion. What he's really saying, let's be clear, what he is really saying is that he does not need to follow the law. He thinks that he is above the law. Each of these violations underscores his consistent obstruction of oversight and a troubling tendency to prioritize political agendas over following the law, which endangers the safety and the welfare of our citizens. I have said it multiple times today, but I will repeat. Russell Vogt has shown us who he is. We have a duty and an obligation to take him at his word and believe him. His repeated violations of the law have far-reaching implications on a nation that was built on the rule of law. When leaders and officials break the law with absolute impunity, then the guardrails have fallen off and our democracy is deeply broken. Mr. Vogt's actions have undercut transparent oversight and have caused the most foundational, fundamental tenet of democratic governance, the rule of law, to crumble. And he didn't stop after his time at OMB was up. In the years since, Russell Vought has been hard at work memorializing his playbook to break the law and give the president unilateral power as part of Project 2025. He literally wrote the Project 2025 chapter on the executive office of the president and how to use the OMB to consolidate even more power with the executive branch. In his Project 2025 chapter, where he spells out the plain as day how he plans to violate the law against, again, if he is confirmed, he wrote that he will recruit staff who are, and this is quote, he will recruit staff who are, quote, creative and fearless in his or her ability to challenge legal precedents. Mr. Vought is saying loud, and he's saying it clear, if we confirm him as director of OMB, he will use every tool that he has to say what the law is. He gets to decide, not Congress, not the Constitution, and not the courts. That's wrong, and it goes against everything our founders believed when they wrote our Constitution and created a unique system of checks and balances. Every member of the Senate and every federal employee swears an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States as they execute their duties. I swore that oath when I joined the United States Navy Reserve, and again as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and finally here in the United States Senate. The Constitution gives Congress the power to determine how federal resources are to be spent. Article 1 of the Constitution specifically gives Congress the power of the purse. This is not some gray area. This is not unsettled law. This is written in our nation's most critical founding document. The Constitution also requires that the president faithfully execute the laws that Congress passes. Again, faithfully execute. Not that the laws should be executed and exercised by the president or Russell Vought's liking, or alignment with the president's policy priorities or campaign promises, but Congress that wrote them. And I would hope that any official confirmed or who swears an oath to uphold the Constitution will do so. But unfortunately, as I laid out previously, Russell Vought has a long history of breaking these very laws the Constitution instructs him to actually uphold. We already ran through several key examples of how Mr. Vought routinely broke the law. But I'd like to do a little deeper dive into the history of these laws and why Congress thought it was necessary to pass them in the first place. During the Nixon administration, an administration that routinely stretched the law to strengthen presidential powers, the president also attempted to use impoundment. In 1970, President Nixon began making deep cuts to programs that communities all across America depended upon to keep families healthy, to keep them fed and educated and safe. In moments throughout our history, Congress gave the president specific and limited ability to not spend the full amount of that appropriation. President Nixon, however, took the idea of refusing to spend appropriations to a whole new and disastrous level. Nixon sought to reshape domestic spending and undermine lawful congressional appropriations by broadly withholding federal funding for a wide variety of programs that communities all across America depended upon. Programs like food assistance, safe drinking water, child care funding, and programs to promote economic opportunity. President Nixon just didn't curtail select projects or limited additional funds to larger projects. His administration tried to use the impoundment to terminate whole programs that he opposed, programs that thousands of communities depended upon and that Congress legally funded. In 1970 and 1971, Nixon made deep cuts to the education, housing, and social services programs. In 1973, Nixon withheld more than $400 million from the federal food stamp program that prevented millions of children and families from living in hunger. Then Nixon tried to withhold $8 billion appropriated for water reclamation, which is used to recycle water for safe drinking, for farm irrigation, and restoring local environments. President Nixon tried to paint his efforts to withhold federal funding as a way to check inflation, when in fact this was an attempt to unilaterally reshape government without taking into consideration the priorities and the needs of American communities that are represented by their members of Congress. And that is why Congress came together to take up and pass the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974. And I think this is, Mr. President, this is an interesting point. As President Nixon was doing this, these laws passed unanimously in the United States Congress. All Republicans and all Democrats in the Senate passed them unanimously. Apparently that was a time when Republican members of the Senate had a backbone to stand up to a president that was acting illegally. And even in the House, it was almost